Ladies and gentlemen, thanks first of all, Ed, for the introduction. I think we heard a lot this morning about the complexity of the challenges we have in front of us. And you will understand, I guess, from an engineering perspective, it's almost like a little bit the McDonald's slogan, I'm really loving it. Because this complexity, as Linda has put it in the panel discussion, this industry actually is probably the best example that technology and the application of technology over the last decades has made a huge difference in the efficiency, the cost efficiency of exploration and of distribution of energy. So, and the challenges, as we all know, are very numerous. I have been to India just a couple of weeks ago, and as many of you know, the shortages, the power outings were still making the news in India. 600 million people without mains power in India. And if we consider for a moment the rushed decision about the phase-out of nuclear in Germany and in Japan, we might soon be wondering what's in store for developed economies. We need reliable energy supply, there's no question about it. We had several opinions this morning in the panel discussion that underlined the point that basically it's kind of an all-of-the-above strategy. We can't exclude one specific energy resource versus another, as we will certainly need all of them to cope with the increasing energy demand. But as Jeremy pointed out just in the panel discussion before, we are also clear about the fact that we have to do that very responsibly. One of my physics colleagues, Professor Wetham, one of the most reputed ocean physicists here in the world, has just returned from a trip to Greenland, and this is not again about sad-looking polar bears. This is about stating the very fact that the Arctic sea ice has reached a record low this summer. The fact that the rate of loss is about 50% greater than most scenarios had outlined. So, as Jerry was making the point before, Professor Wetham was making his voice heard. Now is the time to find innovative solutions to cope with the multitude of challenges we have in front of us. From an engineering point of view, this is about innovation. Innovation that we, as engineers, be it Atkins, be it AECOM, be it URS or KBR, can bring to this industry. And energy security clearly is driving the demand for it. The title of my presentation today is Going Beyond Codes. And I will explain more about it in the next 10 minutes. But clearly, when we talk about innovation, utilizing this kind of spirit of going beyond codes, the question is, how do we create an environment with the industry, together with the energy industry, that enables this kind of innovation, and how do we value it? If we look for a moment, if you allow me to go back in British engineering history, this gentleman here, of course, is Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and it was with a lot of pride, I think, that many British engineers saw that finally he made it in the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. There is something to be learned from Brunel, for sure, when we talk about innovation. He didn't have design codes to tell him how to build the first propeller-driven transatlantic steamship. It didn't exist at that point in time. And this kind of lack of design codes, thriving for innovation now here in this industry, is clearly one of the most important tasks in front of us. You are asking us as engineers today, when it comes to aging assets in the North Sea, to find ways of structural design to prolong lifetime. And clearly the task is also to design extremely challenging assets in unprecedented conditions, for example, when it comes to LNG terminals in West Australia. If you design to current standards, then clearly the only thing that you ever get is what you got before. That's guaranteed. So we have to start from first principles and ask ourselves, how can we do that differently in the future? Before I get into one example more in detail, let me give you three of them. I give you an idea about what engineers in the industry as such, again, many companies like ours, are dealing with today. Let me start with something a little bit more extraordinary. And that's this airplane here on the lower left-hand side. It's the Solar Impulse aircraft designed by a good friend and colleague of mine, Bertrand Piccard, who has just recently flown this airplane from Switzerland via Spain to Morocco on a non-stop flight. This plane is powered by 12,000 solar cells and nothing else, and can store enough energy to fly day and night. Bertrand has the plan to fly this plane around the world in 2014. When he came to us and asked for advice with regard to the carbon composite design, I can tell you this plane did not come with an assembly kit. The other example that you see, on the upper left-hand side is the ITER nuclear fusion reactor, a project that is currently being constructed in Cadarache in the southern part of France by a large consortium of nations. Inside the reactor, we have the design for a fusion reaction. You will have temperatures there in the range of 200 million degrees. That's basically the temperature in the inner part of the sun. And this plasma within the reactor is controlled by superconducting magnets that have to be held at 0 degrees. So the temperature gradient is probably the largest one in the universe. Clearly, as you will imagine, that keeps Atkins engineers on the edge of their chairs. The world's biggest floating structure at the moment, about the size of 4 aircraft carriers, is what is being designed by our colleagues from Shell with Atkins participation. And this is for the first time that in that magnitude gas is being liquefied offshore with this kind of magnitude. This is all innovation. It's design innovation that contributes. Here in that case, clearly, it contributes to the exploitation of marginal offshore reserves. Coming back to my original thought, going beyond code, clearly beyond code. If you look at these examples, that is making a difference. What does it take? What does it take from an industry perspective to make that happen? I'm sure we all in the room have our thoughts about that. I'm not claiming that I have a golden key solution. But for me, it's very much about creating the right innovative culture and atmosphere in a company. It's attracting the best and the brightest out of the industry to contribute to these challenges, make young people understand that this is really the place here in the energy industry where they can shape the future where we are going to live and work in tomorrow. It is also about forming partnerships, making sure that from a cultural perspective, we are working together and get innovative ideas from people across the world. We have a large office, as many others have, in Bangalore. We have learned to seamlessly work together in large design projects between Hong Kong, the US, the UK, and the Middle East. But we are forming partnerships. Like, for example, this morning, we have announced that we have formed a new partnership with our friends and colleagues from Arriva. And this partnership clearly is designed with the nuclear facility and decommissioning space in mind here in the UK. It will address the whole area of EPC offerings, maintenance and operations, and waste management here in the UK. partnership like that, properly formed across industry players, can make a huge difference in getting the best innovative forces together. When you think about how we value innovation at the end of the day, clearly when we look back at the Olympics, we can value it in gold medals, that's fine. In our industry, mostly it's about cost efficiency. It's about applying engineering ideas to make design of assets or of exploration processes or distribution processes more cost efficient. And we have to do that with an ever increasing pace, given the demands of the industry. Let me go back to one example that I'd like to explain in more detail, and that's the fusion reactor. I know, I'm a physicist, and I have heard this joke many, many times, that the commercialization of fusion is out there 50 years from now, no matter in which decade you ask. But I really believe, from today's perspective, it is worth a fresh look. And specifically, this ITER project in Cadarache makes a big difference for the following reason. First of all, what is ITER? ITER is the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor being built in southern France. It is a large-scale scientific experiment that aims to demonstrate, finally, that it is possible, commercially viable, to produce energy from fusion. To give you a couple of framework facts with regard to the reactor, the goal is to produce 500 megawatt of energy from a total input of 50 megawatt. It's the world's largest research and development program at the moment. And from a technical perspective, the fuel input is about 250 kilograms with a yearly output of 1 gigawatt. If you compare that to a coal-fired plant, you would need about 2.5 million tons of coal to produce the same energy. The waste generated with a fusion process is relatively easy to handle, specifically compared to classical nuclear fission. And it's also very safe, as any kind of accident that you can imagine will cause immediate cessation of the process. Some additional facts about the reactor. The main reactor is about, that you see here on the upper right-hand side, the so-called tokamak structure, which is going to weigh about 23,000 tons. Comparison, that's about 3 Eiffel Towers. The reactor facility has the size of about 3 football pitches. And the tokamak building that you see here is about the size of the Arc de Triomphe. Not only the project is cutting edge and huge, but also the progress we made in this consortium, it's called the Engage Consortium, has been exactly on time and below budget so far. We do that, for example, together with a very fine French engineering firm. Our partner here, company's name is Assystem, extremely well working cooperation together with our colleagues. On the second page here, you see the circular layout of the number of bearing blocks. That's actually where the reactor finally is going to rest on. And the direct load of this enormous weight is going into the circular design. At the end of the day, as I described the process, 200 million degrees centigrade, that's almost like the star is born on Earth. That's how you can picture the process, as it's actually the same one that's happening in the sun. Now, as you can imagine, this project, it's the first commercial fusion reactor. Not only that it creates challenges with regard to the nascent technology that has to be applied, but clearly also safety and security is a very important, the most important subject actually of this design. And one of the challenges we have to understand here is to handle tritium. Tritium is a highly elusive substance, and you have to make sure that you can contain it. And one of the going beyond the code design ideas that we brought in as engineers here is that you actually can design this reactor without the need to steel line the internal structure of the tokamak facility. As I said, you judge innovation by the cost savings you induce in a project like that, and that was a very substantial cost savings we could achieve. Now, whether you believe in fusion energy at the end of the day or not is not so much the issue in what I'm trying to demonstrate, but what I think it shows, whether it's research into saving water in hydraulic fraction, whether it's going beyond the code and designing the first commercial nuclear reactor. This is the kind of contribution today's engineering industry can provide for the energy challenges we have in front of us. And that's the kind of innovation going beyond the code I'm talking about. Now, at that point in time, when I talk about going beyond the code in front of a student audience, I typically stop and say, so, what's an iPhone against a fusion reactor? In today's generation of 20-year-olds, you only get so far with this argument. But some of them come back then and say, Uwe, wait a minute. When you talk about going beyond the code, isn't an iPhone or isn't the invention of the internet something similar to going beyond the code? Thinking about innovation, applying innovative ideas in a completely new environment and really making a change from an engineering perspective. And that's exactly right. Now, without going to the internet and to Sir Berners-Lee, let me conclude again with Brunel, which is just closer to our engineering heart here in the UK. And Brunel said once, I am opposed to the laying down of rules, lest the progress of improvement tomorrow be shackled by the prejudices or errors of today. That's exactly what it means, going beyond the code, and that's what we as engineers are passionate about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Do you have time, maybe just a couple of questions? Is there anyone who'd like to? Yes. Anyone else? Sorry, you can get your question, but you have had a couple already this morning. I'd see if there's anyone else who wanted to. No, go on, you go ahead.
I have a very short one about electric energy storage, because that's the big issue about developing renewables up to maybe 100%, some say. So if you have so much to say about innovation, could you share with us some thoughts on it, on electric energy storage? Thank you.
I fully agree with you. That's kind of the holy grail. My NL colleague was just talking about the fact that we have wind in the north and sun in the south. Wouldn't it be great if that energy were not intermittent, but if you could store it in state-of-the-art and modern battery systems? There's an enormous amount of research currently going on in that regard. Supercaps, so electrical batteries, might be one solution for that, but it's clearly about 5 to 8 years out until we have something that really works with the right capacity. But you're absolutely right, the search for the right storage devices that can cope with intermittent energy is an extremely important research subject. And also here, there's lots of cooperation between engineering companies and universities working on that.
Apparently, if you ask Bill Gates, how do I get to be as rich as you? He says, energy storage. He said, if you can get the cost-effective, scalable form of energy, that's the thing that, that's where the next Microsoft comes from. Or even the next Apple, I guess, if we wanted to be more contemporary with it. Anyone else? Well, maybe I was fascinated by your discussion of ITER, and if we've got a moment, I just wanted to ask you about it. You talk about it being commercial. Obviously, I was doing the arithmetic as you were talking. I make it 30 million euros per megawatt, which on these things, as these things go, is a fairly, that's a fairly pricey investment compared to other forms of energy.
Yeah.
What's the kind of, I mean, you're saying you would have some confidence in it. You think this is now, time to kind of get past the jokes about, fusion is 50 years ahead and it always will be. What could you see the commercial future of it as being, and by when might we realistically think that it would be, in some sort of use? I mean, as you say, if you're thinking about this one already as a commercial reactor.
We need to think of it basically in the same terms as fission energy has developed. So we need to come from an experimental reactor design that for the first time works to a standard design that can be deployed in the field much more cost efficient. And that's kind of the code, so to speak, that we are developing now. And I think we are probably 2 or 3 reactor designs out there. So I would picture it as a kind of a 20-year process from now, based on the experience we make today, that we really can reach a cost range that is comparable to fission today.
So still a way off, but
it is.
But in our lifetimes, let's say. But actually, given
Right.
some of the discussion we've been having about solutions and long-term solutions to energy problems, that could be potentially a very significant one. So let's hope so. Excellent. Well, that seems a very good note to end on. Thank you, Uwe Krueger. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Very good to hear from you.